Hello everyone, I'm Giuseppe Caiazzo from Talents and Other Sounds. In this video, I'm going to introduce you our new library, Nordic Folk Strings. Nordic Folk Strings is a Kontakt library based on Tagelharpa, a traditional stringed instrument from Scandinavia. It's a collaborative project with singer and Tagelharpa expert Alessandra Cognetta, aka Psamates, who already collaborated with us for some of our previous libraries, in particularly Omen, Shamanic Voices and War Chants, and Helen, Horror and Ghostly Voices. Nordic Folk Strings is based on samples of two different models of Tagelharpa, a bass Tagelharpa and a standard Tagelharpa, with the former having a lower, darker sound, and the latter having a more peculiar Viking sound, so to speak. Rather than sampling long individual notes, we have sampled entire rhythmic movements to preserve the authenticity and the raw character of the Tagelharpa. The movements are tempo synced to the master tempo of your DAW, and they can be combined in an efficient and creative way by using our customly scripted Rhythmic Legato. There is an entire section of this video that is specifically dedicated to Rhythmic Legato, and I highly recommend you to watch it. You can use the time marks in the description. Nordic Folk String features 8 Kontakt instruments, 4 of which based on the bass Tagelharpa and the other 4 on the standard Tagelharpa. These two groups of Kontakt instruments are divided by tempo range, slow 80 to 110 BPM and fast 110 to 130 BPM, and by the typology of the rhythm, straight or triplets. The reason why we have divided these instruments by tempo range is because some movements work better on a faster or a slower tempo. However, nothing stops you to use a fast instrument on a slower tempo, or vice versa, as the 48 kHz and 24-bit sampling resolution that we used, plus the high-quality time stretch algorithm in Kontakt, preserves the quality of the sound even when you use the movement in different time ranges. Now let's listen to some short cues that I created by using Nordic Folk Strings before jumping into the technical details of the libraries. Enjoy! So let's just spend a few words about the actual Tagelharpa, the original ancient instrument from Scandinavia. A Tagelharpa, in its most basic and common model, is made of 3 strings mounted on a wooden body, and these strings are played all together with a bow. Now, the first 2 strings are the droning strings, which in the GUI are called bass strings, whereas the third one is the soloist string, where the melody is played, and in the GUI we call it solo string. Now, the very first important sampling choice that we made was to sample the bass strings and the solo string separately. And without going too much in detail about the reasons of this choice, very simply put, it allows more flexibility. And I'll show you that right now. When you open one of the instruments, or the 8 instruments in Nordic folk strings, if you look at the bottom left, you will find this switch, 3 strings or 2+1 strings, and the default option is 3 strings. This means that the bass strings and the solo strings are stacked at the top of each other, and they'll play together, and they recreate realistically the original tone of the Tagelharpa with all the strings played all together with a bow. And I'll show you. So as you can hear, all the 3 strings are played simultaneously. However, if I select 2+1, you can also notice a change of the color on the virtual keyboard. And basically the bass strings and the solo strings are mapped apart, with the bass strings mapped on C3 alone, and the solo strings mapped on the other part of the keyboard, these other blue keys. And so if I just play the solo string, and if I play C3, okay, and this gives more flexibility because within the same track or the same MIDI part, you can juxtapose the solo and the bass strings to create different combination with more flexibility. For example, let's set a little bit the BPM higher because we are using the faster tempo range, so we'll set it to 120 and then 10. Okay, so you just have more flexibility and you're free either to play all the 3 strings together or just separate them on the virtual keyboard. And as you can notice, the bass strings and the solo strings have independent controls. So independent volume controls, you have on-off switches right here, these small white dots. And most important, you have this slider in the top right of the GUI that allows you to choose the tuning of the bass strings, which equals to say the root key of the song on which you are working, okay? So by moving this slider, you select different tunings which we have sampled for both the bass and the standard Tagelharpa, and to each of them corresponds a different root key. In the case of the bass Tagelharpa, which is the instrument that we are using right now, the root key ranges from F as the lowest value to B. So let's see how it sounds. And up to B. Another thing that we find here in the GUI is this slider called balance that very simply seamlessly morphs between the closed microphone and the room microphone. So if I set it all up to close, I will just hear the closed microphones. So you can hear more detail of the strings of the bow against the strings. And if I move towards room, what we hear is this. I really like to keep this slider at around 70% of the value, so not exactly at the middle, but a little bit towards close, because I really like to hear all the details of the string and the bow against the string with a little bit of ambience from the room microphone. And also we have a master effects section. The very first thing that you find is the reverb, which is a convolution reverb based on the impulse response that we have recorded in the same room where Maleventum Pompeii, our previous library, has been recorded. So it's this huge Roman tank with a beautiful reverb, and we have used that impulse response for this reverb. We also have a delay. We can switch between the two by using this gray button here. So you can go from a very detailed, bold and round sound to a more textural and ethereal one. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, rather than sampling long sustained notes, we have decided to sample movements, which are basically different kind of rhythms due to the nature itself of the Tagelharpa as instrument. So it's been sampling small chunks of performance, okay, which are tempo synced to the master tempo of your DAW. And as I say, this is to preserve the character, the raw authenticity of the Tagelharpa as an instrument. Now, you can see from the box here movements that you can select different kind of movements, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so I'll just play, for example, 3. But if you don't want to manually try out all the movements by selecting them either from the GUI or by using the red key switches, you can audition them before manually playing them. If you click on audition, you find this cascade of waveforms, and each one of them corresponds to one of the 5 different movements, and you can play them to preview them. So from 1 to 5, top to bottom. So this is now down to 5. Okay, and all the samples here are just the bass strings, not the solo strings. It's just a straightforward and convenient way to audition the movements before actually playing them. Another thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that the whole Nordic folk string instruments relies on a custom scripted rhythmic legato. As you've probably noticed it also from the cues and from some of the things that I played right now, you can hear that once that the movement is selected and I play notes, loops in a legato fashion, the basic rhythm, the basic movement keeps going in the background seamlessly, and it's populated by notes according to when I play that note. And sometimes an example and a picture can explain way better than hundreds of words, so let's just play something very simple. Let's consider this very simple melody that I'll play right now for you. So from this picture you can clearly see what is happening. When I play all these loops in a legato fashion, what happens is that each loop corresponding to different notes is offset accordingly to when it's played against the reference rhythm of the movement, okay? And this allows to have this effect of the basic rhythm going on seamlessly regardless of when you play a new note into it. An important thing is that the rhythmic legato is based on this input note quantize, where you basically decide when you want the comping to happen. So if you are planning to play a melody like this one, that is very played on the beat, then comping on fourth, on, well, half in this case, makes sense. But if you want to play also some notes in between, then you will use 8. So let's give a try to 8, and let's use the second movement, and I'll separate the bass strings and the solo strings, because this way you can it's simpler to hear. As as you can hear, I'm playing on the 8, okay? So the comping happens on 8. However, if I wanted to play something like this, in this case, you can just use 4th because that's exactly when the note change happens. Other thing that I want to bring to your attention, I'll play a very simple MIDI to you because it's something that I need to show you visually. Okay, this is a simple part. As you can see, all these notes in the MIDI part, they all of them start a little bit before of the beat. I can, zoom in. You see this A3 here starts a little bit before, the beat. And this is because there is a input note quantize that basically is a real-time quantization of the input notes. So that means that if you manually play a little bit before of the beat, the script quantizes to the next beat. And so if you are drawing this in a DAW, you have two options. Either you do what I just did here to draw all the notes a little bit before, let's say a little bit behind the beat, or if you use, for example, Cubase or Nuendo, you can use negative delay compensation. So that means that you can draw the note exactly on the beat and then use a round of 100 millisecond compensation. I don't have Cubase and Nuendo on this computer, but we did tests exactly with Cubase with the negative delay compensation by drawing the notes on the beat, and it works. So it depends on how you prefer to work. A very important thing that I really need to make clear about rhythmic legato is that if you want to hear the effect that I demonstrated right now, you need to have your DAW playing. Well, that means that in order to do this sort of real-time comping, the instrument needs to receive, quote-unquote, the timing from the DAW. If you have the DAW stopped, like I have right now, now I changed the instrument, it's the standard Tagelharpa right now, but it's pretty much the same concept. You can still hear the sound. But you can see the loops start always from the beginning. If you want this rhythmic legato happening, this light real-time comping, you need to play the DAW. Even if you have the project is completely empty, you have no clips, no tracks whatsoever, in order to hear the effect, you really need to press play, and this is what you hear. And now it works, okay? So once again, do not forget to press play in your DAW, even if you have an empty project, if you want to hear the rhythmic legato. Of course, if you are recording, that's not a problem, but if you are just trying out phrases, ideas, whatever, do not forget that, okay? Another important feature in Nordic folk strings is the movement sequencer. It's a very creative and efficient way to combine the different movements and come up with completely different movements from scratch. So you can access the movement sequencer by clicking this switch here. You access to this other page, and this is what you see. This is the grid of the sequencer, and you see that on the rows you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are exactly the available movements from the instrument. There are two ways to use the movement sequencer. There are two options here that you can read: 2 keys and 2 beat. Let's give it a try to 2 beat and let's see what happens. Okay. Basically what happens is that at every step of the sequencer, a different chunk of movement is selected according with the selection that you have on each one of these columns, so to speak. So let's give it a try. is happening is that you still have the notes comping that we have seen with the rhythmic legato, but you also have a comping again between the movements. So I'll play it again. Well, let's try another tuning, for example, E. So according with the step, a different movement, in this case is 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, is selected. And if you want to get creative, you have the randomization buttons, which are randomize all, which obviously randomize all the sequencer, or you have a per step randomization, and you can do that by using these small rectangular gray buttons upon each step. For example, if I want to just randomize the first step, I can do it. And same thing also for the other ones. If I want to randomize everything, I'll just hit randomize all and every value will be randomized. And I can also select the length of the resulting movement that I obtain by combining all the basic movements. In this case it's 4, but let's do it up to 8. Let's change again tuning, let's do D. It's a completely different movement, and I'm not sure if I did the math right. That's the reason why I won't say the number that you can come up with different movements, but it's a lot of them. So let's give another round of randomization, and let's see. Okay. Let's also give it a try with 8 and another randomization. Well, as you can see, when I select 8, the sequencer runs at twice of the speed. And that's because when 2 beat is selected, the speed of the sequencer is set by the value in input node quantization. And you see it's a completely different movement. So once again, you also have this degree of complexity to experiment with new rhythms. So let's get back to 4. And let's consider this other option to drive the movement sequencer, which is 2 keys. Well, the main difference here is that whereas 2 beat is driven by a regular timing, which as we seen can be 4 or 8, with 2 keys, the progress of the sequencer is driven by your finger on the keyboard. So every time that you play a new note, the steps moves forward. So let's give it a try. And again, well, yeah, let's go back to C. You see that this small arrow here does not move regularly, but only moves forward when I drop a new note. This can be interesting to experiment with new things. Of course, if you have a very regular timing, there is no difference at all than using the sequencer with 2 beat. But in this case, you can experiment, you come up with movements that otherwise would be probably more intricate to create just by using the 2 beat option. Well, a few other things that I would like to show you. The first one is the tone selector. We have for all the instruments a selection between a clean tone and a gnarly tone. As the name suggests, the clean tone is rounder and fuller, whereas the gnarly, despite not being remarkably different than a clean tone, it features I feel more imperfections like small pitch swells. The pressure of the bow against the string can be rougher, so you can hear a little bit of overtones. So let's compare the two a little bit. So this is the clean tone. Okay, it's better to separate them. So I'll play it again and I decrease a little bit the timing. Okay, let's try gnarly. So as you can hear, it's not dramatically different, but you can hear more overtones, pitch swells, imperfections, so it's nice to have more selection. And I think that this one, the gnarly tone, lends itself very well also for more horror-oriented kind of things. So let's get back to clean. And the last feature that I would like to show you is this one, mono solo string or poly solo string. Well, of course, the solo string by itself is a monophonic sound, like all stringed instruments. But here you can also use it polyphonically. So if I select polyphonic string, I can play stuff like this. So you can create some interesting harmonization that of course wouldn't be possible on the real instrument, but you can experiment with it a little bit also to create this sort of dreamy, ethereal kind of harmonizations. Probably there is a very last thing that I didn't show you so far, is this box here, scale. Well, when it's selected, when chromatic is selected, we have three options, chromatic, major and minor. All the loops between A2 and between A3 and C5 are playable and show they are highlighted on the keyboard regardless if you have the 3-string options or the 2+1 strings option. If you select major, only the major notes in the only the notes corresponding to the major scale of this tuning, which is D in this case, are highlighted and playable. And same thing with minor. And of course this changes according with the tuning. So regardless if I have major or minor, if I change the tuning, the different notes are highlighted, and the white ones, the ones that are not highlighted because they are not part of that scale, can be played. So it can be also used as a visual assistant, let's say, to visualize the scales. So guys, I think that I showed you everything relevant. I've tried to be as quick as I could. I hope that I've managed to do that successfully, and I really hope that you enjoyed the library, what I showed you so far. If you have questions or comments, feel free to drop a comment to this video, or just send me a message at giuseppe@silenceandothersounds.com. Thanks a lot. Bye.